Learning Disabilities, Timeline and History, Education 250 Screencast by Ashley Crowder. Learning disability is a term currently used to describe a group of neurological conditions that interfere with a person's learning. Under the umbrella called LD, there are disorders related to listening, speaking, reasoning, reading, and mathematical calculation. Here is the History of Learning Disabilities timeline. Formation of Association for Children with Learning Disabilities in 1963. Congress passes Public Law 94-142, the Education of All Handicapped Children Act 1975. Congress passes Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, which extends refined services to disabled, 1990. IDEA reauthorized in 1997. Contributions to the 5 leaders in the field of learning disabilities. The look-sight method of learning to read in the early 1940s resulted in a high degree of failure to acquire reading skills. Samuel Wharton, Anna Gillingham, Bessie Stillman, Rommel Spaulding, and Grace Fernald responded to the need by developing alternative methods to teach students who couldn't read by memorizing sight words. Despite their efforts from 1940 to 1960, most students with learning disabilities were thought to be slow learners. Public Law 94-142 in Section 504. The most significant event of the 1970s was passage of Public Law 94-142. It guaranteed that each handicapped child age 3 to 21 would receive free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment possible. This law became known as the mainstreaming law. Children with LD were to be educated in regular classrooms unless the nature and severity of their disability was so great that it could be demonstrated so that they would not make progress in regular classes. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 addresses issues that have to do with other individuals with special needs. Eligibility under 504 is based on having the impairment which substantially limits one or more major life activities such as caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. Causal factors and incidence factors. It is not uncommon to find that several members of the same family have the condition. LD can be inherited. The incidence of learning disabilities increases when there is a difficult pregnancy, delivery, or prematurity. Certain prenatal conditions can harm the fetus, including any condition that interferes with the fetus receiving adequate oxygen or nutrition, or maternal use of cigarettes, drugs, or alcohol during pregnancy. According to the U.S. Office of Education, 5 to 15% of the school population is identified as being LD, but data from 26 countries show that incidence of dyslexia ranges from a low 1% in Japan and China to a high 33% in Venezuela. In the United States, 20% or more of students were having trouble learning to read. Many children are evaluated to found that they have a learning disability, but they do not qualify for special education services because they do not have a severe discrepancy between ability and performance. Primary characteristics of learning disabilities. One indication of a learning disability is perceptual deficit, and they are very common. Perceptual deficits are not caused by deficits in visual or hearing activity. While glasses or hearing aids will help with acuity problems, they do not help persons who have perceptual problems. 80% of students identified being LD have problems in the area of reading. It appears that deficits in phonological processing underlie difficulties learning to read. Research has shown that children who do not develop phonemic awareness will have a reading difficulty later. It is also found that intervention programs will provide instruction, phonemic awareness, and supply ample opportunities for decoding practice and been successful with at-risk and reading disabled children. ADHD co-occurs with LD. Approximately 1 out of every 3 individuals identified for special education services. Here are some examples of symptoms: impulsivity, inability to complete routine, distractibility, inability to sit or stand still, blurting out. Conduct disorder is sometimes a co-occurring condition with ADHD in addition to the primary symptoms of attention impulsivity. Those with CD exhibit a lack of respect for rights of others. Tourette syndrome is an inherited neurological disorder. The condition is characterized by involuntary motor tics or vocal tics, or both these types of tics. Symptoms begin in childhood, increase in adolescence, and improve in adulthood. Programs and setting in the least restricted environment. Public schools provide a variety of programs to assist children with LD. If a baby is born at risk for a disabling condition, the local public school system will be asked to provide help from parents, counseling, locating needed services, and parenting advice. Anatomy and the function of the brain. The central nervous system is responsible for learning. Nerves all over the body pick up sensory stimuli and send messages via the spinal cord to the brain. The brain interprets what has been seen, heard, felt, smelled, and tasted. It integrates a new sensory knowledge with the previously stored knowledge and it decides what to do with the new information. The brainstem is at the base of the brain and is in charge of the automatic function, breathing, heart rate, and digestion. The cerebellum is just above the brainstem and it controls the bodily movements, including posture, balance. The cerebral cortex controls all conscious activity. Implications of the brain injury on learning. Some learning disabled students have brain injuries which can affect their learning and behavior. Brain injuries, including concussion, can be caused by car accident, falls, and sports accidents. In cases of multiple concussions, learning and memory attention may be permanently affected. The brain and autism. Autism is a neurological disorder that severely affects a child's development. It is primarily symptoms arise in social realm, particularly with language and social interactions. Many children have distinct problems with interacting with others, communicating, and maintaining socially appropriate behaviors. ADHD in the brain. ADHD is one of the few learning disabilities that have a distinct link to environmental toxin. When the young brains and bodies are exposed to even small doses of lead, damage can result and often show up in the form of ADHD. Symptoms of ADHD are caused by the brain's inconsistent processing of sensory input. Sometimes a message is sent through the nervous system and an action is taken, but other times the messages the central nervous system receives and are not processed in an organized fashion. Brain biochemistry is an area of ongoing research interest. In the classroom, investigators found that medicated students improved in the accuracy and quantity of work produced. Children who take Ritalin seem to suffer less from the inconsistent messaging in their neurological systems. It is thought that Ritalin helps stimulate the circulatory in the brain. Research on memory. How do we learn? In order to learn, students must be able to attend stimuli, encode information about that stimuli, integrate and store data in memory, and be able to retrieve the data as they are needed. Learning disabled students may have deficits in one or more of these areas. We are continually bombarded with data coming from these senses. The chemicals in our body are balanced in such a way that we are able to stay alert, but also have to weed out the unimportant stimuli. LD students often do not have these abilities. Metacognition refers to the knowledge and control of individuals having their own thinking and learning. It is the ability to think about what one is thinking about. It is an active process whereby an individual examines information and makes a decision regarding on the best way to learn. Because metacognition requires an ability to think abstractly, strategies requiring metacognition are best taught to children over the age of 7. Phonological processing problems. Often the first sign of phonological processing problems is delayed speech. By age 1, child should be able to say, at the very least, one syllable at a time. By age 2, a child should be combining 2 words and make simple sentences. By age 3, a child should be able to use pronouns in a sentence with more complex structure. Often when there is a speech delay, there is often a corresponding reading and language issue. Here is the loss of learning disabilities. First, we have Education of All Handicapped Children, 1975, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, 1990 and 2000, Section 504 Civil Rights Act, and No Child Left Behind in 2000. Parental rights and the law require confidential treatment to their students' records. Only a limited group of people within the school should have access to them. Review and inspect records. Have copies of all records and documentation regarding the child. Release records to non-personnel when permission is obtained by the school in writing. Be notified in advance, 10 days, to any meeting of the child. Request an assessment for the child. Be apprised to the assessment tools to be used and have the child assessed in his own language. Request an independent evaluation at public expense if they do not agree with the district's evaluation. Have input into the development of the IEP. Refuse services or placement in special education. Have independent, fully paid private school placement if it is deemed necessary to meet the child's needs. And request and have a fair hearing if disagreements arise in regard to identification placement services. Comparison of IDEA and Section 504. Section 504 has less specific criteria to receive services and doesn't require parental consent. IDEA is designed to provide government services for those with disabilities in the field of education, so this requires an IEP and extended services from children of 2 to 5 years of special needs. Parents as advocates. Usually parents do know their children the best. However, using that knowledge to get services to help with their children may be very difficult. Parents find information on how to become an advocate for the child most quickly online. The Learning Disabilities Association has information for parents about types of education legislation in place in sample form letters to send to schools and information about different types of learning disabilities. Student rights. Receive due process if she gets in trouble in school. Be heard in defense of self and has the right to review all documents. Be treated at all times with respect and courtesy. Receive a prompt hearing if suspended or faces expulsion. Expect a safe learning environment. Receive FAPE. And be provided accommodations for the learning disability. Teacher rights and obligations. Teachers have a right to work in a safe environment, be treated respectfully by other students, to be able to teach, and they also have an obligation to notify parents in the beginning of the evaluation to set up an IEP. They have to understand the laws, and they have to follow the guidelines set forth in the IEP, and teachers should realize that parents have the right by law to access any copies of anything to add to the student's file. The purpose of a behavioral intervention plan. If a student has difficulties following the school or class rules, the school psychologist should be advised to evaluate the child's behavioral needs. A meeting should be scheduled for the parents for the purpose of writing the BIP. Suspension and expulsion rights. In deciding whether a suspension is justified, the due process officer will not look at the total number of suspension days, but look at how the school dealt with the infraction. When expulsion is being considered for a student, pre-expulsion IEP meeting is held. At this meeting, 3 questions will be answered. Is the student appropriately placed? Is the paperwork up to date? Is there a link between behavior and disability? A decision requires a functional behavior assessment by a specifically trained team. What is MET? An evaluation will be completed by a multidisciplinary evaluation team who will make a recommendation of eligibility of a child disability that interferes with their educational performance and meets the eligibility standards of special education services. What is REED? A review of existing evaluation data is the process of looking at students' existing data to determine if additional data is needed as a part of the initial evaluation, if appropriate, or as an reevaluation. What is an IEPT? The Individualized Education Program, or the IEP, is a document that has developed for each school child who needs special education. The IEP is created through the team effort and reviewed periodically. National IEP and Transitional IEP. An IEP must be placed within 30 days of the evaluation meeting determining eligibility. Special education teachers often use the term IEP interchangeably to mean the formal document and the meeting it is discussed. Transitional plan is a section of the individualized program that outlines transitional goals and services for the student. The transition plan is based on high school students' individual needs, strengths, skills, and interests. What is an annual review of IEP? An annual review of IEP is when the team reviews what progress your child has made toward meeting his annual goals. Then together you develop a new or revised goals for the upcoming year. It is important for annual goals to be specific, measurable, and tailored to the child. Reevaluation IEP. A reevaluation is evaluation that happens after your child's initial evaluation. Reevaluation isn't the same as the annual review as your child's IEP, which happens every year, nor is it just an additional testing. A reevaluation is a full-fledged look at your child's needs. Manifest determination is a process required by Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is conducted when considering expulsion of a student with a disability that constitutes for a change in placement. Due process hearing is a formal way to resolve disputes with the school about your child's education. You can file a due process complaint only for special education disputes, not for general education issues. What is an addendum to the IEP and what is progress reporting? The IEP addendum meeting has been used when teams need to revise the original IEP by updating appropriate sections with new information. The level of performance of each objective is based on data. It is responsible for the general education teachers to provide services with data to assist documenting the progress of the goals. Thank you for listening to my screencast.